journalist, not author. So I'm Dr. Pamela Gay. I'm host of the Astronomy Cast podcast, and with me are three fine gentlemen who do write and use the power of podcasting to help bring their narrative voice out to the world. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with you, sir.
You made it sound like what I do is so much more interesting than what I think, where I just run my mouth. My name's Bobby Nash. As you might guess, I'm an author. Here's a few of the books I've written. I also co-host a podcast called the Earth Station 1 podcast. We have a whole network of shows, but I'm a co-host of ESO. It's a weekly pop culture show. We do interviews and we pick a main topic each week and we just kind of run with it.
I'm Mike Stackpole. I've written over 50 novels. A bunch of the Star Wars novels hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I've been involved in podcasting since pretty much the dawn of time. For a long time, I still am the co-host of DragonCon.
Okay.
So,
when did you start podcasting, sir?
a year before DragonCon had a podcasting track.
Okay.
At the dawn of time.
Yes, no, I understand this, but I launched my podcast February 14th, 2005.
Mine was probably in May of 2005.
Okay.
When I first started doing stuff.
Okay, so I'm the sun wasn't quite as high up when I started.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, the rocks were still cooling for both of us.
Yes.
And I co-hosted both the Dragon Page podcast, where we've done a lot of interviews with authors, and just do a lot of interviews when books come out. So I sort of see it from all the different sides.
I'm Jay Smith. I guess when I started podcasting, the dinosaurs were finally on the earth, roaming around 2006. And from there, my trade as an author, I'm a master's program at Seton Hill University, and I became a podcaster just because writing is a lonely process. I became an audio drama writer. I'm the author of HG World, which is a zombie end-of-the-world type audio drama series, which spun off several series, including The Diary of Joe Woodbine, which is now available as a novel.
So we've seen through the evolution of podcasting, authors using it in a variety of ways, from bringing their works forward, doing their own narration, doing full cast narration, doing let's sit around and talk about what we do with the Sigler First junkie panels. It's true. So how have the three of you chosen to try and hopefully get your name out there and get people buying your books using the medium of podcasting?
To be honest, I like to sell good actors selling my words for me. I'm lucky enough to have some very good actors performing the full cast and the full-fledged audio drama. And it seems like once I have people who come to it for the full cast and the audio drama fully, they're more interested in reading my prose. So it's much easier. It's a gateway drug for them. At least that's how I like to phrase it.
I think when you look at any sort of advertising, sampling is probably the only tried true method to get somebody to be aware of your product. So in giving out samples, whether it's reading the first couple of chapters of your book for free and putting it out there, or in doing interviews where you get to talk about the book and the thing that you liked it, the stuff that intrigues listeners will be the thing that gets their eyes, raises their awareness. And the whole issue of discoverability has been something that the publishing industry has wrestled with forever, and it's only become acute now because there are no more bookstores. Before, we used to think your books were easily discovered because they were on the shelves, and so using podcasting in either doing or in the full cast, and I'm really excited in the developments in full cast stuff, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit, as opposed to just doing readings. It really does raise your profile. Anyone that listens to you for, I suspect, more than 5 hours will go ahead and start wanting to collect everything, start wanting to support you.
And with doing because I also do interviews and things like that, but for having our own podcast, even though we do a weekly show, it's not me every week going, okay, here's my new book, buy this, buy that. I'm getting people to know me through that as well. And then at the end of it, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, I have a new book out that's coming out next month, or so I found that helps too when people are getting to know me, and they're if they like the show, they're willing to go and support. And then we also do other, I do interviews, and a lot like what the guys.
With any audio drama that's out there, or any spoken word, if I just give them that taste, and I could go through a whole book worth of material and find that 30 seconds that's going to grab somebody or hit the largest cross section of my market, and that to me is worth the time investing. And I just surround myself with good people. We use Reaper as opposed to Final Cut, and I have a guy who's brilliant with it. He can turn somebody's really lousy audio into professional sound quality, and it sounds like they did it in a studio. So utilizing that talent, you find the right people, just like a writer finds the right editor and the right publisher. You find the right talent and the right skill, and you can get it to the head of the market.
Yeah, I also think it's for me, and this was one of those things, again, from the dawn of time of podcasting, there was always the question of, can you monetize this? Can you actually make money at it? And what I really like in looking at the model of something like Welcome to Night Vale, which has been really successful in finding pockets of money in different places. While the episodes are free in their continuity, they've started doing live shows, and they came to Arizona, and I got to see one of those, which was great fun. And then they record those, and they will sell those. They have merchandise, and they make sure that that merchandise is limited runs, so you buy it now or it goes away forever. They turned around and they've got a publishing deal now for books, so they're licensing material for other people to produce. And what they've showed is two things. One, the whole podcasting audio drama market has matured to the point where you can actually make money off of this, which is really cool. That means that we can go out and we can say, hey, look, if we can get investors enough to pay for actors, to buy some art, to do these different things, we've actually got a business model that can return stuff to us. And I think secondarily, it shows that especially Americans are willing to listen to the Fullcast audio drama, which 10 years ago, that was really in question. Yeah. I mean, in the UK, because of the BBC, that culture was very much alive. But in the United States, it had gone away. I mean, it started in the United States back in the 30s, and it had gone away by the 70s. And now, apparently, it's quite vibrant, because you see a lot of full cast audio productions being done, and very successful.
I agree. Yeah, I don't do a lot of those at that, where I actually handle the behind the scenes stuff. We're doing this stuff with our podcast. There's someone that does that. So I show up, I do my parts, and they, magically there's a podcast.
It's great to have tech, isn't it?
Yeah, we like to joke. Mike Faber, he's the head of the ESO network, and we like to joke that we have a Faber. That's our system, the Faber system. We do it. He handles the hard part. And so yeah.
I have a Preston.
Yeah. So it helps. It helps to be able to just show up, do the thing, and then let somebody else deal with the headaches.
So I know some authors, Nathan Lowell comes to mind in particular, have managed to harness the power of social media and podcasting and the various distribution networks to bypass mainstream publishing. Do you think that it's going to become a long tail with books as well, where it's not going to be just, I know you have a lot of mainstream publications. I have to admit, I don't know your publishers. Are you going to start eventually seeing New York Times best-selling books that didn't go through a mainstream publishing house?
The way the New York Times bestseller list is set up, because they pull their data from bookstores, it is highly unlikely that you're going to see independently published work making it onto those lists. Literally, New York Times bestseller list does not track digital. So there's no, and most indies are heavily digital. Mm-hmm. While print on demand makes it possible for us to churn out books like this in small lots that look great and are the equivalent of anything New York kicks out, the fact is that the price per unit is prohibitive for us to send it into distribution. So unless you're a big publisher that's got distribution in whatever bookstores are left, that's just not going to happen right now.
So are we obsoleting the New York Times bestselling list?
Yeah, pretty much. No. To the credit of the Times, they have adapted down through the years. they have adjusted their list and they have made changes, and digital may be a change that they have to look at. Whether or not you're going to see New York publishers, the big 5 publishers now, turning around and doing more with audio, doing the Fullcast productions, providing more value to turn that product out, that's an interesting question, not because of whether or not these things are profitable, but because the way that division has always worked within those publishers, it was never the front runner.
Yeah.
It did not pull and distribute sales out to books. It was ancillary sales. And so, they're not comfortable in their business model with how that works. Could there be a shift? I mean, Night Vale may be, because they did get a publishing deal, Night Vale may be the camel's nose in the tent. There may be a shift now on that side, but publishing is notoriously slow. They move in geological times.
So when we all got started, the dawn of time before man, doing our podcasts, it often was individuals in the closet talking to their clothing, recording without echo. And audio got released on Podiobooks, and this was before iTunes, and the amount of change that we've seen in our field, I'm starting to see some of the original Podiobooks coming up now on Audible.com, and we have WhisperSync technology, and Amazon Prime is starting to give you access to audiobooks. How are you as authors keeping up with this changing technology and leveraging it into sales?
I'm a slow learner in terms of modern tech. If someone in the podcasting community says this is successful for me, I will jump on it and try and learn as quickly as I can. My focus is trying to get as many loyal readers to do a lot of that work for me, to try and, if they like the work, that's majority of the battle right there. And then someone will inevitably come to me and say, hey, you might want to try this because I don't have the platform you're offering. And it's just for me, it's almost a Luddite type approach to it. I want the book to be good, and I want to have a solid reader base, and I want to reach out from there to have people tell me what the next step is.
Beyond your own websites, what distribution mechanisms are you using?
I'm using Kindle, and I'm using the Chronic Rift Network, which has its own RSS feed, and we're on iTunes through our RSS feed. And beyond that, it's just it's marketing through social media to get it out there.
Yeah, go.
Oh, I was just say I agree with most of that. It's very similar. We have with the ESO network. Anything I want to do, I can easily post through our network. But also, get things on iTunes. I work with a lot of small and mid-level publishers, and almost immediately when we're talking about books, they are already talking audio while we're still working on books.
Yes.
So it's become, where it used to be something, if the book's successful, we'll talk about an audio. Now it's actually part of the beginning of the process, because when we release the book, we can go ahead and release the first few chapters. We can get it out there. We can let people get a sense of the book, and hopefully they will, as opposed to.
And it's available for free. There are a few people that would pay money to get it if they don't realize that it's available for free. Realistically, however, you might well take that first book out of circulation, leave it out of circulation for 3 months, then move it over to Audible or to a for-pay site, or a package of your own that you sell from your own website. In terms of digital publishing, there are other possibilities. You can do the electronic book, and you can bundle with it the audio. And if you're selling it yourself, the ebook is $5. With the audio, it's $15. All of a sudden, this becomes that $15. Anything under $20 is not really prohibitive if somebody's really into it. And the idea that they can get 2 for this thing, it's the cost of a download, which is negligible to us, but that's real money that turns back.
I'll add that our business model, if you can call it a business model, is to start with a Fullcast audios drama where you couldn't possibly afford, unless you had a big pot of money, to compensate the actors. But after 5 years of producing material for free and building that audience, we were able to start with Podio novels. We could pay one actor, but you already had that built-in audience. So by the time you got to that first book, you had people hungry for content. As long as the content was good, then that money funds the Fullcast drama, and then it ends up funding the print book.
So a lot of the nonfiction, I guess, podcasts are starting to turn to Patreon as a funding model, where you have people saying, we are going to be a patron of your show, we'll pay X, you'll produce Y, go. Is that a model, or is there something similar that can be used to channel serial dramas?
That's actually, that model or similar model has been used with fiction. Tracy Hickman and his wife Laura did a book, I think they've done several books this way, where they sold a subscription to the book as they were writing it. And if you bought that subscription, you were guaranteed to get a limited edition hardcover of the book at the end of the thing. But you were seeing the book coming out chapter by chapter, and there was a forum where you could comment on things and they would interact. And so they literally, in that subscription model, were selling this sort of brainstorming with the authors as the novel is going kind of model, and it was successful. You know, the subscriptions paid for the amount of time it took to write the novel, and then they've got that product and those things. And you see, you know, Patreon is doing it on the installment basis. You certainly see a lot of Kickstarter projects with books where you have that same sort of thing, where they're paid for up front by people who are interested in seeing that, and then the author grinds those out. So those models seem to be successful.
And podcasting is a good way to keep your investors or your fans involved with the process.
Absolutely.
If you're one of the things I do is I try to talk about not only the pitching the book, but the writing process. You know, because there are a lot of people that are interested in what really goes on, or what. And I found when you talk about the process of the work, people get interested because they're like, especially if they're writers themselves, going, "Oh, I had that same issue," or, "Oh, you said you had this problem. I didn't think, I've heard this. I didn't think real authors had that problem."
Oh yeah.
And it helps you connect on a more personal level with your listeners, because they understand that this doesn't happen by magic.
Yeah, another one of the shows that came out at the dawn of time was Merle Lafferty's I Should Be Writing.
Mm-hmm.
And she leveraged that into bringing in other authors to talk, and musicians to talk about podcasting, and she built an audience talking about writing that then went out and bought her books. Mm-hmm. Have you found that it's almost essential to have these other types of podcasts out there alongside your audio dramas to help promote?
I think it's a cooperative effort. I think the more podcasts you appear on, and the more cooperative and the more collaborative you are with other shows, the more supportive they are of you, and in turn the audience is free supportive of your project. As long as they know what you're about as an author, and they get samples of what you're creating, then I think that you have to network yourself. You have to be part of the larger community in order to be successful that way.
Yeah, a number of years ago, about 4 years ago, I released a superhero noir novel called In Hero Years I'm Dead. And I did this as an experiment. When I released it in two versions. One was the $5 basic version, where all you got was the novel. The other was the deluxe version, where in addition to the novel, you got an 8,000-word essay about the writing of the novel. All the things that went in, why I made the choices that I did. My assumption, because at that point everybody was saying that $2.99 was the sweet spot for ebooks. If you sold it for any more, you were a moron. So I was selling for $5 and then $6. My assumption was that for every 3 or 4 of the $5 book, I would sell 1 of the deluxe book. The fact was, for every 4 of the deluxe books, I sold 1 of the basic books. So, people were willing to actually put a dollar value, or literally the value of $1, on that ability to see what the author was thinking, to get that background information. So having those ancillary podcasts where you get to talk about the process, where you get to talk about, or just blog posts or anything like that, where you get to show your enthusiasm for the project, helps draw people in. Now they want to see, they've heard some of the background story. It's like reading all the little press releases that come out about a movie. Now you got to go see the movie, because you just want to, find out how they actually made that work.
Yeah, and I found that it builds an interest. It's an early interest, because especially like I'll do shows and people are like, "Hey, how's the book coming that you're working on?" Because I've been seeing you post about this latest story you're working on. How's that coming? So they've built a genuine interest in following it, as opposed to just here's a book. They can actually feel like they're part of the process, which I think helps.
And going back to something that you said earlier, it is really important to understand when you're doing these podcasts, we can't use the televangelist model, which is 25% content, 75% sales. Because if you do that, if it is, and now a word from our sponsor, buy, you know, for your love offering of $75, we will send you this worthless trinket. No, instead, you know, we've got to be giving them lots of content and say, hey guys, you know, thanks for listening. And by the way, if you want to support this, this is what you can do. And we offer them those options, which people are really good about, you know, hitting. They feel both a social obligation and they're engaged and they want to help out. And that's been one of the, let's face it, we all start out, most of us who are readers started out by having people read to us. You know, we are used to hearing stories told to us. So when you have an author or a full cast telling you that story, you're back in your safe place when you were 5 years old, you know, all tucked up in bed, nice and warm, and someone is reading to you. This is really a very effective message to get inside their head, to be trusted, and then take all their money.
Yeah, but it is, you're right there, it's a very delicate balance, because that, if all you do is buy my book, people just start ignoring
Oh,
it.
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't take much. You have to find a way to, you can still say buy my book, but then here's some interesting content. Oh, by the way, there's a book.
Yeah.
You know.
So with technology, we're basically able to give ourselves away in more and more different ways. And you used the word see. And one of the things audiences want is to see what's in our heads, to see us. And the new Google Hangout on, it's not new anymore, it's 2 or 3 years old. The Google Hangout on Air technology is something that I've seen a variety of authors using to talk about the fandoms that are closest to them or to do readings. Have you started to branch from strictly audio to bringing in these visual technologies as well?
Not a lot. I've done a couple of the Google Hangouts, and they're interesting. It's a good way to connect with people, especially because people can just pop in and out, you know, and it's and you know they're there, as opposed to like we're live streaming this and we have no idea how many people are listening. You know,
we could log on.
Well, we can log on and find out, but I mean, you know, it's nice, you know, when you can see people come in, ask the question, and I think having that and being able to interact, not just us give content, but like have people come in, ask questions, have a little back and forth. I think that really is a good way it really builds a community.
Yeah.
So the difficulty is to cultivate a relationship with them so they continue to work with you through several projects, especially if you have a series. You certainly don't want to change a voice in the middle of a 3-part series, but it's fairly simple to find them, but it's almost like a director's relationship with an actor on stage or doing film.
Yeah, I think sometimes I've done for a couple of podcasts. I've actually read other people's stories, and that was a case of the producer coming to me and say, "Look, I've heard your podcast. I think you'd be great for reading this. Would you be interested in doing that?" And it's like, sure, this sounds like fun. Rock and roll. I think that choosing the right voice for the right part, and then asking.
You can join us on stage.
Are we going?
Yeah, we've been waiting for you.
It started at 10.
It did?
Yeah.
We're not going to get the next book done for an additional 8 to 10 weeks. So instead of spending the time to be in the booth the whole time doing it, we just said, it's time to get someone else in here to do this. And it worked out great. So far it's been fantastic. We were able to focus on what we do, which is making new stories. And Phil Gigante was the guy who did the recording, and he knocked it out, did all the work, did all the editing, did everything for us, and just gave us a finished package back. So it was a great experience.
So when you did your own recording, did you do your own audio editing?
Yeah, when I started out, I did all my own audio recording, all my own editing. Took an enormous amount of time. And then eventually we got to the point where I was doing the recording, and then we would pass off the editing to someone else with a lot of hand-holding to start with until they understood the expectations of the project. And now here you go, and we get the finished project back. So now the only thing that I do is for the Galactic Football League novels, we'll go into the booth, sit down, record the whole thing, and then send it off. That's it.
So one of the things that you said that intrigued me was the amount of time that goes into narration. And the reason it intrigues me, and then the cost of podcasting, is commercial voice talent is about $300 an hour, and you're expected to be able to do a complete novel in 2 days.
Having done complete novels in the studio as just voice talent. I don't know how they can do it in 2 days. Depends on the size of the novel, I guess. You know, Nocturnal was 140,000 words.
Yeah.
So, you know, 650-ish pages in that ballpark.
BBC read speed is 10,000 words an hour.
Okay.
So that's generally
Wow.
the benchmark.
Yeah, and not being a professional voice actor, and it's also my work, I stop a lot. I'll stop, I'll go back, I do corrections as I go. Our production cycle is intended so that when I do the voice acting, that's the final pass through on the galley. So, because there's so much stuff you catch when you're reading out loud.
Yeah.
So we're, as long as we were reading it and finding mistakes, like why don't we just bake this into the process so that the finished print or ebook is as good as it can be? So that takes a long time. But I mean, I've never read somebody else's book. Maybe it goes faster if you read somebody else's book and you're trusting the author instead of arguing with the author on every sentence, because the author's obviously an idiot and doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, I know. An author friend of mine she retained the production company that publishers had retained to do all of her other audiobooks. And she said to do a novel, it was about $5,000 was the total commitment. So the voice talent, the editing, the packaging, stuff like that. So, you know, and again, I think that was 80 to 100,000 words running around there.
The other reason we did it was we started putting the books up on ACX, Audible's exchange, and we started making money at the books, and we were able to just do the math. Okay, well, we're going to make X amount on this book, so if we spend $5,000 to record it in X number of months, then we'll be paid back and we'll start making a profit on it. So that made it much more palatable. To just pay someone to record it for us and then put it out as a podcast, that was never beneficial. But with Amazon, and then it sits in that store digitally forever and ever and just doesn't make as much money as it makes out of the gate, but it keeps on making money, so it's worth it. It's just an investment at this point.
So what's your strategy been on terms of finding voice talent, finding editors and such?
Mostly I leave it up to the publishers, because usually, like I said, a lot of times it's part of the discussion at the beginning, and up until recently, I've not really had much say in the cast, you know, finding the actors, etc. And I'm working on a book now where the publisher's actually going, okay, here's what I've got lined up. Tell me your picks.
Oh, wow.
Who do you hear? And which has been very nice because I can actually listen to it and go, okay, this is close to the voice in my head, and so that has helped. But yeah, for a lot of my stuff, it's like I hear it when it comes out and have no, I have no say in the process up to that point. So,
but isn't it kind of magic when you hear it?
it is, yeah. It's because especially when when someone's putting an inflection and it's like, or they're putting a certain voice to it, and it's like, wow, yeah, it's a little different than what I pictured, but the right voice. The first one I ever did that was recorded as Audible, the actor that read it had kind of a gravelly voice, but it was very noirish story, and so his voice really just added a level to it that wasn't in my head, and just because of his, I suspect it. I have this mental image of him like smoking cigarettes while he's reading it, and yeah, so it just worked.
So I do some voice acting, and I'm always listening to audiobooks, trying to find inspiration and find the voices that suck me in so that I don't ever want to come back out. And there's some books that absolutely wreck you. What have been the books that have affected you in terms of listening to them and inspiring you to up your game because you see these masterpieces out there?
I can't remember it was a Stephen King book read by Kathy Bates, and it wasn't Misery, but I wish I could remember it, but
I shall Google while you all talk.
I'd heard, 100, 200 audiobooks by that point, and when I heard that, I realized that the vast majority of these people were absolutely phoning it in. Like, it sounds pretty good, but they're not making craft out of this, and Kathy Bates just ripped the doors off the thing. So, which is the other reason I was so hesitant to start using other narrators way back when. It's like, most of the audiobooks I heard, it was people not necessarily speed reading, but they really weren't putting in the craft, and maybe I was listening to the wrong stuff. And I'm like, I want someone who's going to take the time and tell that story the way it's supposed to be told. And back in the day, the only one who knows how it's supposed to be told is me, because I wrote it. So,
well, and there are some that you can tell are just reading it, and there are some that are acting it.
There you go.
And it does make a difference.
There's an actor, Rob Iblis, who did the unabridged Lord of the Rings trilogy, also did The Hobbit, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I started listening to Fellowship of the Ring when I was on a drive from Phoenix to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is 7 hours through a wasteland. And I was not there. I was just in Middle Earth, thank God for a highway, because it was just straight on, and it was just fantastic. And even to the point of doing all the voice acting, but even singing the various songs, it was brilliant.
The book was Desperation.
Desperation. Okay.
I think for me, Harlan Ellison reading Repent Harlequins at the Tic Tac Man and A Boy and His Dog. When I first heard that, I was in high school, and it just blew me away. I didn't know who Harlan Ellison was at the time, but yeah, I had to read everything he put out.
Another author who was really good, read both his own stuff and then read some other authors' things, was Roger Zelazny. Mm-hmm. Brilliant voice, and when he would do readings, I mean, it was just absolutely magical. So.
And then Stephen Moore reading Life, the Universe, and everything. Stephen Moore's voice is just amazing.
I'll say my favorite one right now is Stephen Pacey, who's the guy, I think I have his name right, is the guy with the eye patch from 300. And he does the Joe Abercrombie First Law trilogy. That dude's money. That's you don't even have to like the story. You can just listen to him read it. And I like the story too.
So, full cast versus single narrator they're two entirely different things. How do you make the choice to do one or the other?
Money. Our overall budget's not that high. It really depends on the story. If it's a big picture, if we're talking about a cinematic scope, I would prefer to do full cast just to maximize the experience. If it's a more intimate story, The Diary of Jill Woodbine is about a girl and her personal viewpoint of the zombie apocalypse. So it just would be wasted to have all the extraneous voices because it's all coming through her POV. But H.G. World itself has so many different characters and so many different plots that it almost demands having a number of different people to express their POV.
It's time, money, and quality for me. If you can afford to have a studio and have everybody come in and read together, like what's that zombie podcast that did extremely well?
We're Alive.
What's that?
We're Alive.
We're Alive. We're Alive brought everybody in the studio, knocked that whole thing out. If you are having people send in parts from different areas of the country, even if they all have pretty good setups, there's a different room tone, and the ear can hear the difference. So that was always a no. And then the other reason was if one of those people missed their deadlines, the whole production slows down. So I was always, if I could bring everybody into one room and do it, that'd be one thing. Other than that, I know where I'm supposed to be most of the time. Most of the time I'm in the booth on time and I'm working when I don't screw up the schedule. So the project's going to get done if I'm recording it. Or now with one guy, it's totally going to get done. So it costs, I can't imagine how much it costs, but it's got to be a lot.
But wouldn't you get a different energy too when you've got everybody in the same room playing off of each other?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I mean, that for me is the only way I'd want to do a full cast recording is to have everybody there and doing their bits, with the some minor exceptions maybe. But I think the other thing for me with the story is if it's multiple viewpoint, then probably having a voice for every viewpoint would be cool. But if it's first person or a single viewpoint, then just having one voice reading the whole thing is fine. It's just like you're sitting in that person's head, sort of listening to their thoughts as they scroll through.
Yeah, one amazing example of that will wreck you completely. Make sure there's like flowers and puppies for you after you're done listening. Is Caitlin Kierman's The Drowning Girl that was narrated by Susie Jackson. It's the story of a woman with schizophrenia, and it's this heart-wrenching, beautifully broken story. And what makes you break is they found this young voice that manages to carry all of the emotional content while always keeping this youth in her voice, and finding voice actresses like that. I can't imagine how many, it's part of the Neil Gaiman Presents series, and I can't imagine how many narrators he listened to find this voice. How many do you typically listen to before you settle on who's going to do your work? Well, you have your publisher. I'm so
Right.
sorry. I keep asking questions you can't answer.
Well, I'm doing it on the new one. We're doing an audio of Ghost Scout, the first Ghost Scout book, and they're sending me samples. So I've listened to like 6 different people read like the first 3 chapters.
Okay.
So it is interesting to listen to the different takes and how each narrator is presenting it. So it's interesting here, but it's still new. Like that happened within this week. So it's still new for me.
I'm currently working on a Fullcast, an audio drama with effects and music, and this is after 5 years of doing the satellite production with the same pitfalls you guys just mentioned. And I picked actors based on the performances of previous actors. We had specific roles, and we made
It's a finished project, even uploads it to Audible for us. So we're like, yeah, he's the gold standard.
I'm sure like Kathy Bates too, because I've heard this from voice actors for animation. Sometimes they like doing that because I can go to work in jeans and a t-shirt and not have to go spend hours in hair and makeup, and so they're still acting, but it's a little less than having to go to a major movie or something. So it's a nice little break for them.
The only time that I did really any writing for a full production, I adapted one of my own stories and then was working with a partner to do a series of radio plays that we never produced. But when we were doing those, when we were writing them, we knew people that we would, in essence, write certain parts for, because we knew this person could easily do this stuff, and would talk with them ahead of time, saying, "Look, when this comes in, there's gonna be a Saturday, and that's gonna be your day." And they were all intrigued and honored, and they all had good voices, but a lot of times you can, in addition to voice actors, you can just talk to people who are in radio, or go to a radio station and find out who they've got as ancillary talent. And those guys, in a lot of cases, they become very, it's also ego-driven. The fact that they are asked to do this production, is a big coup for them.
So one of the random things that I do is narrating planetarium shows, and we're often able to borrow NPR studios that aren't in use to use their equipment. Do you ever find ways to borrow, steal, beg equipment from universities or radio stations?
For my regular podcast, it's simple. We just Skype, and our editor has all the equipment in his studio. So
Okay.
we borrow and steal everything. If one of our actors has a studio, we ask, where do you live, and can you bring people over to join you? But we do.
It's like the drummer in a band. You know he's got a place.
But what's really cool is that this is still so new to so many people. But like you said, they're so willing to step up and donate what they had just to be part of that artistic experience. Universities in particular think, radio? No, it's online, it's audio, not really radio anymore. But oh wow, I've got to be part of that. Like, okay, sure, yeah, we'll bring you $1,000 worth of work to do for free. Thanks.
We really haven't. When we started out, I was literally in my clothes closet with the old Flower Power iMac and figuring out how to hook up microphones to it, and it was a disaster. And I worked for a company that did audio recording, so I would go in and do my podcast at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it worked great until chapter 9 when my boss came in at 5:30 for some strange reason and found me in there using all of the equipment. She's like, "Yeah, we're not going to do this anymore." I'm like, "Okay, I like my job." Since then, and then when I signed with Random House, the first thing I did with the signing at the advance money was went and bought all really good gear for the recording. I still use it today, and now it's complete overkill because for like $300-400 you can be totally tricked out. The Zoom H6 and you're done. But I have a lot of stuff now, so I don't have to borrow anything.
Yeah, I think you find that there were a lot of people that have got home studios that are, whether they're musicians or just people that have been doing audio productions, which they have downtime, so they will make that available to you at little or no cost. The other thing, especially community colleges, all have these facilities. So you sign up for a course and you get lab time. They're not really going to mind, and you have a pool of other students that you can tap as voice talent, and all of a sudden you're there.
That's the best answer I've ever heard. Take a class, make an audiobook. Everybody's in.
This is how we got our audio editor. Is I called up our university's mass comm department. I'm like, "Do you have anyone who needs a portfolio?" And we started paying basically minimum wage for this kid at the time to edit Astronomy Cast, and now we started in 2006, and he now has a master's degree and works at a commercial studio doing videography, and he won't let anyone else ever edit Astronomy Cast, and I don't think he even bills us anymore. So yeah, you never know where the talent's going to come from.
Did you want to take questions?
Yeah, so I was about to say, I think we're coming up on 10 minutes left, 12 minutes left. What questions do you all have for our panel of people who bridge written and recorded media?
Nobody wants to go first.
It's they have to stand up and walk to the mic.
Scary. I want to get y'all's thoughts about anthologies. I know that in the history of podcasting, there's been a number of both written and audio anthology series, both that authors have sponsored and also that authors have kind of joined in on. What are your feelings about those in today's climate?
Well, I'll jump in on that because we've got Bones Are White and Blood Is Red, our two anthology collections. They're all my stories, and they're in the Audible store. And that was also, I forgot, that was part of our auditioning process, was we found the author or the readers that we liked, and then we paid them to go do a full short story for us. And we were then able to, sit down and listen to the finished product and also sell that at the same time. So I think it works out pretty good. They don't sell nearly as well as full-length novels. I mean, it's, like 20% sales compared to the full-length novels. But they're out there, and once you've made your money back for whatever time you invested into it, they're just going to sit in the Audible store and somebody somewhere is buying them and listening to them. So it gets more product in, and if it gets you closer to the multiplier effect, which when you go to Amazon and you see somebody has one ebook, you're like, meh, whatever. But then you go somebody else, and you've never heard of either person, but this person has 10 books in the Amazon store. You're like, wow, they must be good. So it gets more titles in the process.
Yeah, I would think it would largely depend upon the voice talent, and if they're matched up and they're really good for the story. And there have been and still are podcasts which are anthology series where they're getting different people to read different stories, and I've got to believe that the downloads for any particular episode largely dependent upon that chemistry between material and reader.
Mm-hmm. And I know with anthology books, it's very similar too, where you can have the collection, but you can also break them up and sell them individually at a lower price sometimes, which is a good way to get people to, like somebody will sample a short story or a short novella from me for $1.
Yeah.
If they've never heard of me, they might be willing to listen and download an inexpensive short story read by an actor, to try it, just to see what your voice is like, or to try out the actor's voice.
Sure.
Where do podcasts just like Escape Pod fit into this landscape?
I mean, that would be an anthology podcast.
Well, it's I don't know, I feel like that's a different animal because
Yeah,
you are
that's why I
specifically
asked the
going to hear the
question.
short story collections. Whereas I think if people have listened to all the stuff I have on Audible and then they go to the anthologies, I don't think they enjoy them as much because of the changing voice. I think the vast majority of audiobook consumers are people who are commuting and they just want to kind of settle in for that drive across the wastelands with their one narrator and get to know that person and all the characters. So I think the shorter stuff, it doesn't do as well for us anyways.
So I can actually help you in part with why it doesn't do as well. Those of us who've been Audible members for forever have subscriptions. And when we're looking to spend our 2 credits or however each month, we look at the length of the books. Yep. And so it's like this, I've looked at you're one of the authors that always pops up for me as recommended. And I see your anthology and I'm like, it's short. I'm not going to waste one of my 2 credits on something short.
You want more bang for your buck.
Yeah. So it's all of us who are playing flat rates. We tend to go for the most expensive stuff that's in Audible and the longest stuff that's in Audible with our flat rate.
I do the same thing with my Audible subscription. So
yeah.
I hear you.
Sort by length.
Yes, exactly. My favorite button.
That's very true. One of our core markets is long haul truckers.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That is the audiobook core market in long haul truckers.
They're very vocal too, so we came out with something that was less than 90 minutes. They were like, what the hell? And then the short stories, they didn't want to do it all because it's 15, 20 minutes. Forget about it. No.
Well, you guys have been talking about, I couldn't because Audible then and still has a monopoly in the iTunes store. Everything you see in the iTunes store is coming from Audible. And so I put it into the iTunes store as like an album, but turned it into all the keywords for books. And Audible found out, I don't know how, but I got sent a cease and desist letter to get your damn audiobook off there. So I'm like, all right, you caught me, copper. So then I talked to him, and I'm like, great, listen, I got this thing, and I understand how ones and zeros work. You know, it doesn't cost you anything. Put it on a server and sell it. They were like, great, and they sent me a standard publishing contract, which was 12% royalty rate for 7-year contract. And I'm like, you didn't do anything. You didn't make a cover. You didn't edit. No human capital has been put on this project at all. You don't get 88% of the sale price. And then they're like, well, that's the offer. And I stomped around and said, screw you, I'll never work with them. And then that worked for a while. And then I saw ACX, and ACX has, you know, at the time we got into ACX, it's 50-50. We make half, you make half. I'm like, can't really do better than that for this giant marketplace with all of these customers. So that's why we got into it. And we also got out of the audio, the shipping business, I call it, storing these giant files and transferring these giant files and troubleshooting it for customers when they have problems, and people who don't understand how to put stuff on their iPod, like added an enormous amount of time to a limited time structure we had. So now Audible does that for us. So we're in the audiobook making business. We're not in the audiobook shipping business. That's why we use them.
Earlier you had mentioned that with the older publishing model, you'd have to wait to see if a book was successful before there was any decision to turn it into an audiobook. But Scott, you had mentioned that nowadays sometimes it's even part of the editing process, where before you've released the book in an independent publisher or self-publishing, you've already started on the audiobook, and you had mentioned finding corrections that way. There's obviously still a cost analysis before you have to make the decision to put it out an audiobook, but with the new models that are available for publishing, when do you make that decision? Like, you still have to wait to know if it's going to be successful, correct?
Not for us. For the stuff that we do, Empty Set Entertainment does, there's going to be an audiobook all the time. It's just a question of when can we get someone on the mic to get that done. I think most publishers, the default mode is, yes, we're going to put out an audiobook because it doesn't cost very much compared to what you make once you're good with Audible. I'm at this point, mid-list or higher publishers, I'm shocked. Like, what do you mean you don't have an audiobook?
And this is the thing, just so you know, the way traditional publishing contracts break down is they break all the rights out.
Yeah.
When you're a single proprietor-owned situation and you control all of that stuff, then you can make those decisions to do everything all at once. But if I've sold a paperback to Bantam, Bantam's audio guys don't see it that way, and therefore they make decisions with entirely different criteria than we do.
The podcast, actually, I put out 5 books with Random House. That deal's done. The first 3 books, Infected, Contagious, and Ancestor, they put out audiobooks. It worked out great. And then it came time for Nocturnal and Pandemic, and they were annoyed that I was still giving away the audiobooks for free in the podcast. And they could not, again, it's a rounding error for them. They don't understand that, like, this is, people listen to it because it is free, and they won't pay for your product otherwise because they've never heard of me. That's actually what led us to be able to get the rights back from them for those 2 books, and those are the 2 books that sell the most for us at Audible. So it's a business decision.
And even doing podcasts where you're not like giving the story away, but where people are interviewing you, or you're doing something just to you're out there. Mm-hmm. I've had people at conventions like this come up and go, I love your podcast, I come to check out your books. So where they may not have heard of my books without the podcast. So it is a good way to sell yourself first, and then that leads to book sales. So I mean, it's.
And I think we have a final question.
Yes,
from our
final
track
question. Since you're all authors, this is for all of you. What is your inspiration for your work? How do you become inspired? Do you have a process? Do you have a favorite chair? Like, when you're writing, because my husband just wrote a book and I was fascinated to watch him write, and it's a really hard process. It was for him. So I'm curious, is it something that just comes naturally? Do you how do you get the juices flowing?
I'm going to give the nonfiction perspective before these guys go, because I do read a lot of nonfiction. I usually find that I end up writing the whole thing in the same place, no matter what work it is. So like, I have a textbook that I'm working on, and if I'm not sitting in my big black chair with all of my references kind of arrayed on the arms and the foot and the floor, I feel naked and wrong. But other things, it's like, this is going to happen on my home computer, and so it's just sort of like, the part of my brain dedicated to this work belongs to this place in my house, and I don't know why. That's just the way my brain is broken.
Since I'm Fullcast audio, I listen to old time radio. The newest production I'm in is called Hidden Harbor Mysteries, which is 1930s superhero pulp. So I'm listening to a lot of The Shadow, a lot of X-1, Suspense, a lot of the great audio series of the 1930s and 40s, and that's like listening to jazz for me. You just sit down and you hear the voice, you hear the rhythm, and then you naturally get into that feel, and then the words come naturally.
My whole environment is the computer and headphones. So being somewhat itinerant, I drilled myself in it. The writing's got to get done. It doesn't matter where I am, it's got to get done. So it's just playlists and the computer and headphones. And as far as inspiration for wanting to write, it's just a question of remembering to go to the bathroom. Because that's always, if I could do anything else, I'd probably do something else, but this is what I do.
Yeah, I've got an office at home, so that's where the writing gets done. When I do editing, I'll generally go out of the office because I really want to separate the editor-writer environment. It makes it easier to keep the editor at bay while I'm working. You know, in terms of motivation, I mean, money is a great motivator. You know, wanting to actually keep the house, oddly enough. But I think the other thing is that, you know, there are times that stories or ideas for characters or things just begin to pulsate in your brain. And, you know, there comes a point where it's like, yep, now's the time, let's sit down and do this. And as you say, you know, remembering to, you know, looking at the clock when you start and it's 5 hours later and you don't remember any of that time, but, you know, here's all these words piled up. Yeah. I mean, it's just wonderful.
I also have an office at home, so I write there. I do when the weather's nice. Now I live here, so during the summer those days are few and far between. But I do like to sometimes go sit outside and write. I have a nice screen-in porch, so I'll have a little table out there and just to get a little fresh air. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing. I always make sure before I start working, I grab like 3 or 4 bottles of water. You know, they're on the desk in that way, because yeah, in the same way, it's like, you know, I realized I've been here like 6 hours. And you know, my best day was I started one morning and I got up really early because I was on a deadline, and deadlines are a great motivator. And I started writing that morning, and it's like, I get about 5 hours in, and then I got other stuff to do. And when I finally looked up, it was dark outside, and I was like, and I realized I've not eaten.
My husband calls this writer's blackout, because he'll do things like call me for dinner because he loves to cook and I have too much to do. And I'll say, I'll be down in a second, and an hour and a half later, he just sort of abandons food next to me. And I have actually a few times gone into I know exactly what I need to write for this piece, and it's usually something short for a magazine, and I'll write it, and I'll say.
I have cards up here if anybody would like them for on my websites for both my podcast and my books, but my website is bobbynash.com. The podcast I'm on is the Earth Station 1 podcast. It's a weekly show. You can find us at esopodcast.com.
I'm Dr. Pamela Gay, co-host of astronomycast.com. And I'm the executive producer of 365 Days of Astronomy, which is a community podcast with hundreds of voices.
I'm Michael A. Stackpole, and you can find my stuff at michaelastackpole.com or on Amazon or pretty much anyplace else.
Sorry, I'm Scott Sigler, scottsigler.com, or search for Scott Sigler on iTunes and find almost all of my books for free as serialized podcasts. Search on Audible, Amazon, I'm all over the place.
I'm Jay Smith. If you like zombie fiction, you can go to goodmorningsurvivors.com for lots of free content, or pulpit fiction is hiddenharbormysteries.com.
Thank you again. And be sure to go into your app and rate the session.
Yes.
If,